The final chapter on JFK, Chapter 5, Segment 4, 1960 DNC.
Thanks for tuning back in. This segment is the 1960 Democratic National Convention. There is a saying in politics that it can create strange bedfellows. And nothing could be closer to the truth than this 1960 convention, where two bitter rivals, LBJ and John F. Kennedy, combined together to create one ticket of a presidential nominee and a vice presidential nominee. How that happened is one of the more interesting points in history, and in fact may provide the actual basis for why John F. Kennedy was killed. Before the convention started, as things looked, John F. Kennedy had about 600 committed delegates of the 761 needed to obtain the Democratic nomination. So he was 161 short. And coming into the convention, Kennedy and his family still could not figure out how to get that 161 more delegates. At the same time, LBJ, he sent Connally onto the convention 1 week before. The very first thing he did was held a press conference. And at the press conference, he pulled out medical records. The medical records of John F. Kennedy that were stolen from his two Manhattan doctors' offices the month before. The medical records had showed that Kennedy had a recurring social disease for the past 25 years, and also that he had a serious condition called Addison's disease, which, unless at the time you're receiving experimental treatments, would lead to most people's deaths in their 20s. At the press conference, John Connally announced that Americans should not vote for Jack Kennedy, but rather should vote for Lyndon Johnson because Kennedy was going to die in office from Addison's disease. In response to this medical records break-in and the claims made by John Connally, Kennedy had his doctors issue a report saying that the claims are false. The following day, Johnson, in Washington, D.C., made an announcement that he was planning on running for office and becoming the Democratic nominee, and he left Washington for Los Angeles to begin his, what he called, politicking. Johnson's politicking really didn't relate to anything other than just demeaning and insulting Jack Kennedy and his family. One of the first things he did when he got there was he had 200,000 pamphlets issued, which were all false about Jack Kennedy. And the issuance of those was a federal election violation. Beyond such items, Johnson, when he would talk to reporters or other conventioneers, or even to Jack Kennedy and Robert Kennedy's face, he would call them names. For example, Jack Kennedy, he called him this skinny little kid with rickets. For Robert Kennedy, he would refer to him as the little. He referred to the Kennedys as Nazis and Nazi sympathizers. He also referred to religious hatred by telling the public they should not vote for the Kennedys or for Jack Kennedy because he was a Catholic and the Pope would be running the country, trying to create some type of anti-Catholic bias. The only short-lived success Lyndon Johnson had at the Democratic National Convention at all was, I believe, either Tuesday or Wednesday of the convention, where Johnson had booked a Biltmore ballroom and he challenged John Kennedy to a debate at the ballroom. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to Jack Kennedy, the only people in the ballroom were Lyndon Johnson, his wife and children, and all of Johnson's supporters. No one else. No conventioneers, no anything. And for a 40 or 50 minute period of time, Johnson in the ballroom stood up and just insulted and demeaned Jack Kennedy, But aside from that one event, nothing Johnson did seemed to be helping him deadlock the convention. Johnson was trying to stop Kennedy from getting the 161 more ballots he needed to win the nomination on the first ballot. And if Johnson could stop that, if Kennedy only got 760 votes or less on the first ballot, the convention would be deadlocked and the delegates would not have to vote for the person they were required to on the first ballot. So it was a free-for-all after that. And Johnson was hoping his power would take over on the second ballot and he would then win, just like he was hoping for in 1956. It looked like Kennedy was not going to get enough ballots to win in the first ballot in the convention. However, as strange as it seemed at the time, on Sunday morning, the state of Illinois, with a total of 69 delegate votes, changed. Following Illinois' break of the first ballot holdouts for Kennedy, Pennsylvania followed. And Pennsylvania announced that the state would now cast 64 votes for Kennedy on the first ballot. And different states after that started falling. No one understood why. No one cared. No one could figure out the deal that was occurring. But what was known was by Monday morning, hours before the actual start of the convention, John F. Kennedy essentially had all the first ballot votes he needed. Now, from that time forward, up until the actual vote, Johnson, while he was running around trying to still get ballots and votes and trying to stop various states from having their delegates agree to vote for Kennedy on the first ballot, it looked like it was over before the actual start of the convention. On the first roll call of the convention, to win the nomination, John F. Kennedy, who needed at least 761 delegates, received 806 delegate votes and won on the first ballot. Lyndon Johnson received only 409. Lyndon Johnson, who had not run in any state primary and who announced his candidacy publicly only days before the convention, he came within 46 votes of frustrating Kennedy's needed first ballot majority win. If Johnson could have only secured 46 more of Kennedy's first ballot votes, Kennedy would have received only 760 or less, and the convention would have been deadlocked as planned by Johnson. But the Kennedys' money, organizational skills, and other influence combined to destroy Lyndon Johnson's lifetime dream by a mere 46 additional votes. Johnson was furious. Rather than going and thanking his supporters, refused. He went back to his hotel suite, began swearing, cursing, throwing the telephones around, and drinking and drinking and drinking. With Kennedy's success at the convention, the issue always comes up how Lyndon Johnson actually got on the ticket, since he mistreated the Kennedys so badly. And there have been different views by experts who claim they know how Johnson got on the ticket. One was he bought his way on. 2, he used his political influence. 3, he blackmailed his way on. All of those may be interesting, but they're not the truth. The convention ends. John F. Kennedy is the Democratic nominee. Lyndon Baines Johnson is the vice presidential nominee, in spite of the fact that he ridiculed Kennedy during the convention, stole or had someone steal Kennedy's medical records, ridiculed Kennedy and his family, called Joe Kennedy Sr. a Nazi sympathizer, did everything he could possibly do to steal the nomination from Jack Kennedy. Somehow, he ends up on the ticket, in spite of the fact that he wasn't even among Kennedy's top 10 choices. And Kennedy had actually asked another senator by the name of Symington to be his running mate. Symington agreed. Kennedy pulled that request back. And Kennedy, by having Johnson on the ticket, knew that in the general election, his ticket was not going to carry the state of California. As a reader of history, I have always been bothered by parts of the convention. And that is, I couldn't understand why the delegates needed by Kennedy before the convention actually swung in his favor on that Sunday. And I also couldn't understand how Johnson ever got on the ticket. Further, I could never understand that privately, after the convention was over, Bobby Kennedy told his friends that it was the worst day of his life. Jack Kennedy told his secretary that the truth is so dark it can never be mentioned. With that said, let's go to the next segment, which may provide insight to those questions. See you then.